For yes. Good morning, Gen Rinpoche. Tachi Delay. Good morning, Katrina. Thank you for translating for us. And welcome to people online. Motivational prayers. The link is in the chat box.
To the teacher and Tao, transcendent destroyer, oneness gone, for destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, one God to bliss, nor of the world, supreme guide, beings to be tamed. Teacher of gods and humans to you, the Buddha and Tao, transcendent destroyer, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, I prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. When I was supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paced 7 strides and said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise that I bow. With pure bodies formed supremely fine, with emotion like a golden mountain. Fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner the best supreme guide to I bow. With the supreme signs, face like the spotless moon, color like gold to I bow. You are immaculate, the 3 worlds are not incomparable, wise one to I bow. Great, compassionate protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean to the Thabkhe I bow. True purity, freeing from attachment, true virtue, freeing from the lower realms. Unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path of freedom too, well established in the trainings. The holy field endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame on a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble. A dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all seeing, subdue the full false, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, 4 lands, sun and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you. May all beings enjoy this pure land. Venerable holy gurus, in the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Iram gururam namandalakam niriyatayami. I take refuge until I awaken in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I am awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Again, Dixon.
Yeah. No, it's done. Yeah, George, but the audition soon. 我千里云同世界number months，这讲是真没事的。我被出了我们连巴的，让人对吧？当多了小送的，我是送巴的了。千里云同是，当个人是千里云同不是的，云那个讲业的忙不是几个的，怎么讲说的？讲过讲的关系知道，云那个千里的人不得有嘛的。thì mẹ tôi trên địa yến thông sẽ sẽ năm bát bê mang bu năm trăm mang bu ở đây xem cái mang bu ở đây chỉ đang được này mang bu ở đây bây giờ để trả sao vậy nè xem cái sung giá chim bò bây giờ để chơi này cô bây giờ cần giúp bé trả lại chứ tiền dùng để bây giờ nhịp trả lại chứ càng cái bé chỉ ta này ta đây xây dựng được một thế gì này để sang mà sai chỉ lo cái sản xuất trái ở đó bên mấy sự yapıyor ở đây cái này cô 근데 뒤지요 말아 뭐 신이 연통 시제 넘버 마운스 세 자치면 연통도를 대야 그제 대로이네 통동 그제 뭐 대로 대야 된대요 말아 산이nen지도 게이나 된대요 말이야 또 생겨네 된대요 말아 어디도 세 자치면 미시베스 망배 출라 오만 렘바터스 배차도 망바도 추다 오만이 트레셔네 코지 오마데 다다 통 추디 샤샤위사라 ngarazone kaga to maro chudi nyamdo tong mada kaga che maro ngamba ko ya tongda che ba che kante ne kaga oma de tong chudi sha sha yore so so ko ya de le chudi tanda ko ya ke o mara kagu me na oma de tong sha yore o de na she ngarazo she che namba de ma bu chang ju yore yena tanda ko che de so so tanda kar ko ya de ti chang ya ke chi bu de song go ra ngarazo tanda ngarazo tabu yena tamune topa chebar chekke de tinde ke marwa ti medisa ko tanda ko yate se delia jo chima penjele pe tanda ya butu ko wara ngode chete ke chishu de wa jo chima de nge song ma do se sada mili ke de ke chishu de wara o ti de zang ngode chechu du la so wa de so tanda ke chimbu de wa o ti sila na ma do so ya.
So here, as the Pandita Atisha has said, this life is short and there are so many things to know. We also don't know the length of our life. So like a swan extracting milk from water, we should take up our desired aims, take up that which is beneficial. So here we have this kind of life that, although we might think we are going to remain a long time, it is something that is quite short, right? We don't have an infinite amount of time. And that being the case, we can also look at, well, there are so many things that we can know, we can learn, right? Different topics in different sciences. Even if we look at like the Buddhist texts, they're so extensive. Like there are over 100 volumes of the Kangyur and 200 volumes of the Tengyur. Maybe if we had a really long life, we could put ourselves to reading and learning all of that. But it is the case that there's no certainty in terms of how long we will live. We could not make it till tomorrow or the next day. We could soon be gone. And so here we should be like a kind of swan that is able to, it said, extract milk from water. Like they have a special way of drinking somehow that they are able to leave behind the water if they're not thirsty and just get the kind of essence of that milk. And so although there are so many things that we can learn, that we can know, we should focus on extracting that which is most meaningful, most purposeful for us, and really what is most important. I mean, for us as ordinary beings without any sort of high special realizations, we really need to focus on those things that are beneficial for our future life, making sure that we are able to get a good rebirth in the future, avoid falling into the lower realms. So in particular, like the 16 dharmas for achieving a higher rebirth, that which is really beneficial to us in order to be able to ensure we can have such a birth, that is the kind of dharma that we need to focus on, what is most beneficial or most meaningful.
뭐야, 뭐지 누가 소라. 뭐 단다란 거야테. 계시슈데 어디래도 학교와 치마. 단단한 신기치 땡저기 밀리 개발시 최다. 제어에 개와 연계. 단달에 학수야 용에 저와치 거야디 개치슈레 지레도 뒤중이나 뒤땡케보데 정소나 아니 겨와들이야 타르바다 탐제 김배 주식이 빠샤 양내 양도샤 겨와치마 겨와네 겨와야 균마 제바셔야 타르바다 탐제 김배 톱시기 그투술에 배트 강가 용거라 뒤인데 단단한 거라서 민주스 내 송기 동을 내 반주네 저 미때와 치마 미 하다 미때와 톱도 있지 뒤톱시기 좀 미기 좀 주딩라 소버트술로 저 근데 대사 많이 봐 타르바토에 쳐도 동반이다 공동아 예념을 소버트서 강가데 강투도 그니 보테 요르 땅에 요삼 랑게 탑시시네 강가 요르 요르도네 녀모만 드림도 기회 초게 저와디아 페르 드야 요삼 드로에 맹게르시네 제게 오마로 남주네시 라자 샤샤 오르마도 제게 오마로 어디 인데서고 미게와게 코에 좀 미게와데 가제는 요르 땅나 요르 땅에 요삼 네버 총을 쳤다 뒤에도 저 겨와디아 페르스네 페르다 소소 요라 네버 요라 되잖아 타르바 전주스 가서래 메다바다 쇼 메다바다로 아니 동반이라 써봐 대sol에 삼을 다 박샤샤 야 디나시티 랑 타르바토게 시도 라지부터 많이 봐 심지어 탐제거든요 세대 파말에 써봐 년대 대소에 랑다 지바 코코테 요래삼 탐매바 요령 붙이네 코테를 마음발라 투스테고네 빼쪽으로 샤삼 이쪽으로래삼 대소연님도 타로시 제구였는데 네가 연계시랑 제투에 네가 요를 제구였삼사 어디에 심지어 탐제부터 쭉쭉되게 산제지 고반 탐되게 라 자주고심 된다 민중 장심 양다부에 따와 수두션에 되는 데도 예송의 동에 랭게바 좋네 탐득게네 라 나다 미테월이야 코 레다님뭐 라와메바 텔레 탐득게 라지부심 타도 많이 봤습니다. 탐제게 타바치고심 심슈께네 라견 곳에 연대 군대기 가서 유래가 네바요라 네바 예산 코텐데시 주와 차위인삼 뒤지까지 고망고 남나 다른 남사 호업대 걸레 줘야게 요마라 단단에 박샤샤티 줘라 오야 질람는 망자서 오야
So now, what is really most important, most purposeful for us is to gain a good rebirth in the future, to ensure that we have this special kind of human rebirth wherein we meet with the Dharma. And so laying down the kind of, if we get skilled in that, skilled in creating the causes for a good rebirth, then we can begin to lay down as well the imprints for those higher goals of liberation and gaining the state of omniscience. But first, we need a kind of renunciation of the lower realms in the sense of taking up the practice of abandoning the 10 non-virtues, such to ensure that we are not born in the lower realms. And so here, when we think about the kind of trainings for the being of small scope, we need to have that foundation of ethical conduct to ensure that we are able to continue to practice. And so for the sake of liberation as well, we begin to contemplate the kind of emptiness and looking at the faults of our various afflictions, what it is that cause us to cycle within samsara, and try to reduce those, to eliminate them and get rid of them. And this isn't just theoretical. We can't just sort of learn this as information and just remain as we are, but really it needs to be transformational. It needs to be something that makes a change in how we are able to, or how we act in this world. And so we have the ability to reduce the causes of bad rebirths. We can give up non-virtuous actions more and more, increasingly diminishing those kinds of causes. And so too, we can increase our virtues more and more and more. We have that sort of potential. It is right within our own hands. And on the basis of really practicing that well, if we then begin to think about impermanence, think about emptiness and so forth, we recognize that we want to get out of this cycle of taking rebirth uncontrollably altogether.
and create those kinds of imprints for gaining liberation. But then when we think about it, it's not just us who is in this situation of suffering within samsara, but all of our mother and father sentient beings, those who have acted towards us with great kindness, are just like us. They are continually cycling through this suffering samsara, and we should be concerned with their welfare as well. And so thinking that I need to not just liberate myself, but all of these other sentient beings who are in a similar predicament, we should strive to be able to actualize our potential. We all have the ability, like we have the ability to become a fully enlightened Buddha. It's managing to actually put our efforts towards that. So if we were to be able to become a being who is able to work for the welfare of all sentient beings, who has eliminated all faults, developed all good qualities, we could then really be of help to them. So here we can see this encapsulates the kind of attitude of renunciation. First, renunciation of the lower realms by eliminating their causes, and then renunciation towards all of samsara, which involves developing the view, the understanding of emptiness that allows one to get out of that. And then there is this attitude of bodhicitta, this wish to not just get oneself out of that cycle of uncontrollable rebirth, but rather to get all sentient beings out of that as well, bring them to the state of liberation. So here we should recognize that we have the potential to do this. We are able to eventually become a fully enlightened Buddha. However, this is not something that is instant. It takes a long period of time. It takes a lot of development, but we also shouldn't sort of diminish ourselves thinking that we don't have that ability. We do have the ability to become a fully enlightened Buddha if we progress in that direction.
No, yeah. No, the Hindu Kasura. Turba de Tanjana of the Kachambu Chebetana, Chidandoko, Longi Tamba Jinguari Awadwa. Turbata, Sosu Tur Milisha, Turbati, Kachamburi, Longi Tamba Jinguara. Longi Tamba Sayate, Sanjay Sung Shavatipa, Chevata, Yambati Ora. The Longi Tamba Jingur, Longi Tamba de Mazina, Yamumana, and the Tonga Tamba Teleton Yamsalanti Ungumarwa, Yamlisha Umardo. Or the Hindu Kasura. Gang Turbati. Turbati Gachada, so Turbakan go Kona Anima de Sungudwa. Turbata, Sambata, Gombas, and Nambalia. It is our concession of all cheese, cigarette number, cheese, cigarette, Hindu cheese, cigarette, Janki cheese, cigarette, Samado, Soso, Yamlation, members of the Yeshe, which are Yunguara. Soso, Timana, go to Desirako, Tikarilla, Cash, Dakimedo, Consequal Lamnella, and Zishida Kebake Omara. Yine ko te thaba chen so samulta so assembly ya ti ya ka ga le chen yo de ro to ku ya da ti me ne ko ti thaba chan ja ge election ni te de go chu shan ta shan da de da so assembly ya ke ba ke do go me na ti sam ki pen da so ma ro ti du ka so da o thaba chan ja me ba che samulta ti ram de ku do me ge chi shes na ale ti imresta ko che Tata Yingu by Jusen the Garesum, Sosa Samutangura. Samba said the Terra, Sosa Yindan Yilu Durang Shingu Yara. Samba said, Nezulam de Samutanche. The Yingu Jusen did, Till Jusen did one, dear Samsa, Relam get on the Shembasura. Oh, dear Bush, so the Yana and the Kumjichi at a combat Yongura. Oh, teach one in any. Chitsong about Sungudua, Longchiwade, Kasa. Relam Tramujibe, Namjutase. Rigbe Lam Tege, Nature Tramu Samadi Yakuji Jetuwe Jora, Relam says to one answer Pechanalia. Tina T. Yungubechusen Kare, Mangubechusen Karechi, Tajashi Ora, Hakoechi Orwa. Taas Michi Kumakuya Misha Chichen, Hatan Magunge Koramadu Suja Hamagunge China. Pasu said Hamago. Yine Tajashi and Ekoti Kare Kolakao Sudo, Mega Sudo Chiche Pajachi, Timjubacha Ganga Hakondudo. Musutonga Hakodo, Tieko Reglamzira, Jidegi Kotegi, Namjushil Tanisha to Guara. Utina Shishan, Pejet and Datia, Yinguet and Dakar and Meguet and Dakar, Samutane, Rigbe Lamgiton, Koyaguchi, shen tuye yora, te soza sozo samutane shen yesi yora. Jiglam tamujibe namju tangasi. Yo, ene shunglu tambara shawe, nyamli se. Tela tene shungu dega, te yabuduwa, te mesenali yabuduwa, samutanda yabuduwa samsa. Susu nyamli chiyesi gugu yora. Te yabudu nga chigisa, te yabudu ngone samsa chikuwaru mado. Ti mena ene tanda kayo mara. Shunglu tambara shawe, nyamli tangsuda. Ane tsiki chawasi, ta shengeri shene tsiki chawda, iri sumdata tesuti yabu shenpati kuwara. Santing dina rinji namsu nangsi, rinpoche namba sumde te tsiki wara nga zu. Seidang muyda tusuda reda re rinpoche enkiri te, rinpoche ngune te tiri esi wara. Zamli dila nechi ngune shengegi, rikbe lamga chindu si wara, riklam tene. Ngune kari yimayi, hako tuwe si wara. Riklam tamu jibe namji si wara. Tati nashi shimba nashi, di ngone re doa sam, soso le choa ji lebe doa. Di ngone re sha sam, tinte chuni abu doa sam sa, shunglu di so she de, soso tamga le cha de, di abu doa sam sa, soso kashe kashe lang, kashe kashe tor che chi yung doa. Di pen pendo ro ma do, di lab gyo re sene, lab ne kari yo temi doa. Soso li a chi choa ji le kurwa. Shunglu tambar shawe, nyamle tangase, nyamle shene mi simju tibu she, rawa, shente mendra chigi mi mambuli samlo tangtungi, sosu e dewar sotungi mechidelia. Sosu nangmi nandra, chizo randa nyamdo dodi chingi ina dewar sotuwe. Pe tina shi nyamle de tosi chebe ina ya. Ali shente pashashini tsawa pangpa, jang chebe ina digdoa. Yabu chebe ne, mechi china kadigane tini, Niri mesi na kandi tewa saya yora. O tindi kasura. O tati sumbude, tingi bude kesumbudo, ya ati jishana. Mandoja ya.
So, therefore, hearing, learning extensively, and then being able to sort of explain that to others is what we call sort of uphold the teachings of the scriptures. And we need that, right? We need to uphold the kind of teachings or hold on to the teachings of the scriptures and seek out extensive learning. But just that extensive learning is not enough, right? That itself is not sufficient. That's the kind of beginning. If we're able to just say like, oh, the Buddhists say this, the Jains say this, the Hindus say this, that's a kind of superficial level of knowledge. And that really itself is not going to benefit us very much, but rather we need to engage in thinking about these things, really contemplating what it is that we have learned. So here, extensive learning and holding up the kind of tradition of the scriptures is something that is important, but we really need to think about it in a way that it creates a difference, it creates a transformation in our mind. If it's just something that we have as kind of intellectual knowledge that doesn't make a difference in the mind, then that's not really beneficial. So we need to use our logic to think like, this is how it is. This is what it is saying exists or doesn't exist. This is the reason why it is like this and so forth. And so we need to know these things, come to understand them more deeply through our own logical analysis, not just having sort of heard them in a way that we're able maybe to just explain it to others or sort of lay it back out, but rather to have a kind of real conviction about it based upon using our own logic and reasoning in order to establish that for ourselves. And then on that basis, we can engage in the kind of habituation through meditation. So here there is a verse from Je Lama Tsongkhapa that talks about how it is that we can use our sort of analysis, using reasoning in order to understand these very subtle points. That is something that we all are able to do. We have that kind of analytical faculty if we employ it, if we engage it. And we can come to an understanding that is based upon using that kind of logic and analysis in order to get to the second step, which is having all of these texts arise as or like personal instructions that based upon our analyzing and seeing, oh, this is how it is, this is how it isn't, this is what it's saying, this is what it's not saying, and then actually have a feeling about that. Oh, this is something that is good, this is beneficial, I'm going to take this up into practice. This is the next step of really seeing what we have learned as not just being something that is a sort of knowledge or information out there, but rather something that is applicable to our own mind. And then based upon that kind of arising of these scriptures as personal instructions, we can use, one needs to have a kind of skill in composition and understanding of grammar and so forth in order to be able to then articulate that to others. But really, these are the like actual sort of jewels or things that are precious. I mean, we usually think about gold and silver and those kinds of jewels as being precious, but really it is our own analytical faculty, our own ability to use logic to understand something and then really come to have a feeling about it. Once we have analyzed and come to a kind of certainty through that analysis using reasonings, then we can see, oh, this is something good, this is something that is beneficial, I'm actually able to use this to tame my own mind. And it is through taming our minds in that way that we create happiness in the present as well as in the future, and not just for ourselves but also for others around us. Like, even if we just say have learned that we should abandon harm and really analyze that and take it up into practice, just that very practice of abandoning harm, how much happier are we? How much happier are those around us if we are able to actually implement that in our lives? And so here, as Lama Tsongkhapa says, we need to use our analytical faculties in order to come through logic to understand these various subtleties, and then have these arise as instructions, things that we are to put into practice, not just as kind of information.
Oh yeah, this one.
Yes.
Oh, the Duka sort of. Oh, Sheba, Tuba, some Mayba. The Tanda de Samlutan, the social Swazi Lebuda. Oh, the wrote upon Tilia Pechana Suguda. Puram Shin Shining Buchamis, the Pechana Sugara. Pena Puram Pushin or a Pushin. Purum Gishing the two Lejane, Pagwate Sadena. Namushida Yomara. Pagwa de Pashu, Tinalo de Saganene, Namoyora, Pushindila. Ra. Chilo Pagwa de Shunetil, Tos Kamutes, Namuke Yomara, Namune, the Nalo de Yora. Tinashi, Shumba de Nashi, Shuniticha Nashide, Mawa, the Nyabati Sera. Tishi Shumba de Shimawatis. Keshe, the Nyade, Shumba Nashi de Sera. Tati Tanda Samutana, so Samlichan, Tanda Samutade. Tā Puram ki pushing nalo rot sāvata shidesira. Puram shingshu nyingbu chiya me chara. Ngawara chibe rone nana du chara. Shimba shebe Puram ro shimbu te nyingma re chara. Tishin shimba te nangshide mawata nyemba te re chara. Tishin shimba te shimawate. Roda pone tela tasime ro sāva nashide tanda samlutanja susu tsoa nyone te. Te ngone ine karre, mene karre, sabsu soa nyona. Ene ngone ro, param ki ro, pushin ki ro, ngone di nyongu ade sera. Oti indi zanko, sheye da nye de, kode peke shimbura. Ti mena ene shenge yongu marwa. Sheye nye mene shenge kura nyamili shenge yongu marwa. Peke shi, ina te samki choshi chikyo marwa ese. Tile lagwa chigi te tonda samutane. Susu nyamyoli chane tsoa chile tabshi tiri ese uto. Oh, did you love that? Yeah.
So here, not just sort of knowing and hearing in a kind of intellectual way, just learning, we really need to have a feeling about these things. We need to interrogate them and investigate them such that we give rise to a feeling. And so there is a verse that talks about how hearing, or like sort of hearing and explaining and speaking on things is sort of like the husk of a sugar cane, right? That has some sweetness to it, but but the real sweetness is inside. The real sweet flavor is like in the internal part of this. And so hearing and explaining are likened to sort of taking the husk of that sugar cane. There's a little bit of sweetness there. You get a little bit of the flavor, but it's not the actual sort of sweetness of the inner part of that. And so the real taste, the actual sort of sweetness comes when one engages in reflection, in contemplation on what one has heard. So as this verse is sort of paraphrasing, it says the husk, hearing and explaining are like the husk of the sugar cane, but to get the real taste of that, you need to contemplate it. So it's not to say that hearing and explaining things are not important. That's extremely important at the beginning for us to be able to get that first kind of knowledge, but we shouldn't be just satisfied with that, but rather with what we have learned, we should try to penetrate into that, get to the real flavor, the real taste of that, wherein we give rise to a kind of understanding that has feeling with it, that has a kind of conviction in it.
Oh yeah. Oh, didn't that? Oh, dear, Zakar soda. Oh, that and that. Tabai Karsoda. Taking got to shung nearly drunk at him. Oh, Tidu Gasoda. Tabata, Titangalia. Gokona could Tabachi shung Gachabushida, the Soyas Medua. Mexican Dias Medua. The Khan Tabate. So Yamleli Chane. That's what do Chana. Want to let them make over Topsiki. Make your chupa and kill what you to say to doa. Tegalia. 타바토에치도 공동아 영아 삼사 라오영아 짐바 아니 나이 삼사 만조 공조서 차당한다 일이 차당한다 된제 녀모 공동아 예 차도 드심 대주 상마에도 대주 일이 몇이나 대야고 매대 경이 삼바이네 알레 담부 강가 매 마스는 대경이 삼테르네 삼도자 코산지 마송아 삼사데 미케와라 미케와임바 뭐시 겨울에 기어임바 뭐시니 랑도르 소소 제베이네 대삼제시다 팽이라 어디에 가서라 어디에나시 아니 뭐토저데 심제리가 봤다들에 다시 잠배 취지 따서도 미게 심제다나야 지치도 최지도 가고래도 지치도 완전 러셔도셔 강가 최전에 제도가 망쳐 쳐듯이 줄여요라 맞아요. 망샤데 디바 장장 주야르시세 삼르타 마시나 저 최세데고 로셔도셔 강가 미게 심제 따나야 장시 잠배 취지다 알아도 디미디야 오도 오메르 컨데나 코멘들 고출로 가래 코미리 가래 시타다메다 메다 스타보라 심지어 탐제 그 대원들 동안에 소소나 시대에서 타니무로 제때나 다요라고 다시 잠배 취지다 미리 심지었다 내가 저 따단 거라네 그 대하옵니다 예를 채우라 영어 채우라 그 대바상에서도 따단 신나는 교화에도 아니 아까wan도나 제수이라지 야도나 강가 제수이라지라 심지어 탐제 대화도 대외주다 내가 주시 쓰기도 하더네 야도나 가고 뭐 네가 그 배우도 소부야부도 탕부도 삼사 벤조야부도 그 소화 강행면도 삼사 제수이라지네 교활로 좀 사야도 제수이란데 교환하는 로소시다 깔레시다 매바 교환하는 초도 주고 있습니다 미 야구시에들 소소 야구시 상도 때문에 제수이라지나 단단단다 두고 와라 페시페실이야 교망 저 단다 두고 있어요라 어찌되고 도셔도셔 상말이야 야가지 누나 대화다 면대화 규제삼 야, 그 단다에는 단다시 되는 삼사 야부도 삼사 성로 당셔 주는 강가 개월에 줘야 요라 어디인데 그 만드나니 강가 권도 당하게 된다 싶다 지담에다 강가야 손대 소소 슈다르지 따나 하고 해리도가 단단디나 가지고 납중갑디 소야돼서 정말 소소 남기 초알이 영어된 게 소시에 되요라 samlo tende kogre tende matan tende matan sungdo oti ndu kasura susu shara ji tanche tanda ngazu susu ya samlo tanda de kare do keware do migeware do lumate re do tagi chena ne yar do ya do ga the major test all the sense of those and that's all you need to judge about your mara. Yeah, this is long.
So, hearing and just sort of hearing and learning in that way, again, is not what we should be satisfied with. Really, as the earlier quote from Atisha said, there are endless objects of knowledge. There are endless things that we can know. But really, if we summarize those things that are most important, we think about knowing the 10 non-virtues, knowing what is virtuous in order to be able to secure a good rebirth as a human or a god. And then recognizing the faults of the afflictions, the faults of our anger, of our pride, of our sense of I, and grasping at I and mine and my side and the other side and so forth. I mean, we have to begin by recognizing that these are faulty, right? We have to see, oh, a non-virtue, this is non-virtuous, this is virtuous, and be able to distinguish between those two. We need to see the faults of this kind of attitude of anger and pride and ego grasping and so forth. That's the beginning, is having that kind of awareness or recognition of those. But then we need to change our ways in terms of how we go through our life, how we are going about our daily life. So as it said, we should come to see, I mean, not just the faults of non-virtuous actions and the faults of our various afflictions, but the way in which we look at other sentient beings. We should look at them with a kind of honesty, openness, and love. And rather than sort of seeing them under the light of our usual kind of afflicted mind, see that they are just like me, and that they want to have happiness and they don't want to suffer. Really, all of those things that we learn are then things that we need to apply in our daily life. We need to recognize what is non-virtuous and then actually abandon it. We need to recognize the faults of our afflictions and actually make an effort to reduce them. We need to recognize the ways in which we see beings sort of and disregard them, and instead try to transform it into a way in which we look at them with this kind of love and recognition that they are just like me. I mean, normally when we walk around in the world, we're making all kinds of distinctions like, oh, that's a person of a different religion or a different race or different than me somehow, rather than having that kind of attitude that sees them all as being sentient beings who want to have happiness and don't want to suffer. And so too, if we know how to do this, we can make all of our sort of interactions and thoughts as we go throughout our day into something virtuous rather than our normal sort of non-virtuous patterns. Like if we are out in the world and we see others doing good or having good things, to be able to rejoice in that is something that doesn't cost us anything to do, right? And we say these things like, oh, may all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. Well, when we see beings who are happy, who say have a good life or have a good physical body and are able to do a lot or have lots of wealth, we should rejoice in that. We should rejoice in the good that they do and the good that they have. And this is something that is very easy to accumulate karma this way. If we rejoice in the virtuous actions of others, it's said that we ourselves accumulate a similar kind of karma. And so again, if we know how to do it, we can transform everything into our practice of Dharma. We can make our mind entirely virtuous. But this is dependent upon taking those kinds of things that we know and actually using them to apply to ourselves, to sort of correct ourselves, to sort of look at the various faults that we have. Like we've been talking about these 57 faults, and they are things that all of us have in our daily lives, right? But we need to actually recognize them within ourselves, sort of take an accounting of our own behavior, and not just have this sort of abstract knowledge of, oh yeah, that thing's virtuous, that thing's neutral, that thing's non-virtuous, but actually see that within our own mind, apply it to our own mind, and make an effort to get rid of those things which are non-virtuous. See when we are under a faulty kind of an attitude, and transform the way that we look at others. And that's really the practice of Dharma.
Oh yeah. Oh, that is it. That and that oh, kasara. Chene de she. Rangin de ba tang tu lang sha sum ba na she. Tang ra zo ko ya de. Ke wa chima pe je la da mi kyu tu be ten ke bor che to ya. Ro. Ane te zo mai ba. La da mi ke wa de tung e ji ran shi che be. Te le tar ba. Ko le ten du tar ba. Le da nyomo be sha wa du kyu ne. Ki ji che ma ku ba. 풍부동 le che me ku ge. Tar ba to ba she go sam sa. Dira. When Telela was simply Tamje, Ranchibu Sang member, simply Shanley, Sosobe, Robert Chetunge, Roa, never yours over corner Robert Chetunge, Sanjay, Yankushi, Yendekundi, Kasashi, Yuachasam. Ninjun, Chansim, Yanda Betawa, the Tongbani, Medapa, the Sunganzu of the Kanga Haku Yora. Tatiko Yana Yando Comedera. Namsa Koti Tagadaga Namsa, Nime Mubasaranashi, Miticho Kanga Drosha Marwa. As Toma Mebane Miticho telecom de Ora. Tangzi the Kondo, the Aja, the Trado, the dressing bar, Joa Toma Mebane, Combachi Ora, Kunamsa, Nime Mubasavana, she said to it, Yomarwa. In a telecure, but Tabaris de Comdena. Never shown to dry everything until Ako took it. Nem just as a condo Tabashivich, Tawarashi, Condo, you miss some of the Seva Kombudangati, Shabu, some Samutana, Nuru new drivers, so sort of Gura. What do you do, Casoda? In Jewish as a yard with our Kangalo, go around the Robsa, Tevada, to the Tonis near to that, it and that the Yana and the Samata. Thank you, Johnson, and the Yana and the Comia. Oh, teaching. She said, Namsada, she said, Namla Puria Salatu, so the switch you have some Tajimedua. Tuni Kochani, also so similar you are do something, or Tendesically you are do. You can do personality order. She said, the coach, much of a Taraku. You didn't mention a tabar, take you much of a competence coda. Tiniko never church Dora. Nimakashe Peshibuche come Usu Jebse, Kale Jebshirache, Yatine Ushana Kemana, and a Kayomara. Kimacha Shevese, Tike Shabisuda. Nidi Sajam Metin to do some jere. Nima racing is a Kalasaya Matambache, Shuk Jabja, or Tati Shibuji Komgusam, Kale Jaguare. Nidi Sajam Mete. Nima racing is a Kalasaya Matambache, Kale Jaguare, Chinam Sanchi. Shumatana Kebe commandos. Yamle Jesar Namsada, Tobara Keberson, Namsa Kebashabucha, the Shabuji Chagre, some sentinels, some Tagio, Marisera. Shumatane. Chu Yamle Jebata, Namsa, Tobara Keberson, Shabuji Kigri, some Gio Marisera. Shumatana Kebe commandos. Shasum Lozi, Jimmy Yemeches, Shasum Drosasuna, yes, at the Kaleka, Jara, Imakashega, Atene, you shall and do sir, Tayomare. Shasum Lizes, Nimasum Drosona, Jesadaco, Yemen, Shadalian, Tagitos Kangayomare. Or Tendesa in a can Namsa, never turned to Maresha, Tendetilla Chiameomas, or Tendesa, Yotekaya, Ketu Maresha. So, but Chui Jersey answer. Chui Junash, Tawarish, but you much of a terrace in Dodena. Koyaja Madua, Koreoma, Yajan Dodogara, and I just teaching Mara. Oh, said Tostoshania, you shall Cheshara. So, but Chui Jersey answer. Should do something, Chui Junash, you much of a Tawarish, take up Dena. Some Korang, some Yundangi, Rangshire. Ranking the dishes come then a coacher ready. Couldn't rangshire. Contra sign of contra usage some and in the contra church to Tina she severage in some tanda and a course of a church ranging each other. Yundangi ranshi semji and that is a ranking ring amad come the Tinanshi come Yanko and Koyari already. Timato Tapsi and Dake Omara. May say Omara. The King to the Comnani, so the Yajan Rondogare, Kaja in the Paksha, Shagiora. Oh, Tayabu in some territory in the Comtos or some Suzuki all the chase of Yarache. No, Yabuchos or some such. And temptation, I think they gave out of Madame Namsa, Casoda, Mendrada, Shivichi, Chiku Samsa, or Tendese, Toptical, Tovia, with some Tangimedo, and the Kasha upside the Chetambu Shivicha, it's a my usual dog, Kagamedusa usual. Or to remember that on the Tobada Samba Combe Rimdi June. And he can say you they could take such a you are awesome. Tation do it to Kundune, Yamli Kuma Sheva Shigi, some Tasha do Shunglia Tobata Samba Combetum Juguin, some Kulu set and the Samba Shosa. Oh, yeah, did it.
So here, as the verse from Atisha says, like the swan extracting milk from water, we should take up our desired aims, right? And in terms of what we really are aiming for, we can talk about various levels. I mean, at the first hand, we need to gain a good rebirth as a human or a god based upon practicing the correct kind of causes for that. And so ensure that we have a kind of basis to continue to be able to practice. And then looking at samsara as being in the nature of suffering, we see that even if we take rebirth as a human or a god, that's still under the control of this uncontrollable rebirth, right, due to our karma and afflictions. And so therefore, there's the thought to attain freedom from all of that cycle of suffering, and to do so not just for yourself, but really to strive to be able to benefit others who are in this situation, to become a being who has eliminated all faults and developed all good qualities, and thereby has the ability, the knowledge, the compassion to be able to lead others from that state. So when we think about the like sort of distilled essence, our desired aims can really come in these three: this attitude of renunciation, the correct view, and bodhicitta. So things like thinking about emptiness, seeing the suffering nature of samsara, and really recognizing that all other sentient beings are in this same situation. And so here we should think about these topics and then meditate on them again and again. It's not something where just upon one hearing of this, it's like turning on a light and all of a sudden all the darkness is gone. But rather, we need to recognize that we have been habituated for so long to the kinds of things like grasping at permanence, grasping at a self, our anger, our pride, our hatred, and so forth, that we have to work against that. It's not as though we can just instantaneously, like switching from dark to light, be able to get rid of those kinds of faulty patterns and habits that we have had since beginningless time. So in terms of trying to develop our mind, this is something where we need to really think about it, think about what we have heard, not just be satisfied with the hearing of that. Think about it, contemplate it, and habituate our minds to it again and again in order to counteract those kinds of long-standing patterns and habits that we have. We can know this from our own example, like our own experience. If we're really angry, say, and we begin to see the faults of that anger, and we begin to see the benefits of patience, then we see how we can slowly reduce that anger and increase our patience, our ability to bear with things. And so here we can expect to do this, but not in a kind of instantaneous way. This takes time. This takes really habituating ourselves to these. So here, if we are able to, by practicing the Dharma, gain another good basis, another good rebirth as a human or a god, we can continue this kinds of practice. But this is something where, again, we shouldn't expect instantaneous results, like all of a sudden we have these kinds of realizations or these magical abilities, like being able to suddenly fly or something. But rather, this change is something that happens slowly over time, and it's really through continuous practice and having that continuity without cutting it, without having like sort of starts and fits, spurts of practice and then giving it up. The continuity is extremely important, and not having a sort of break in that continuity of practice. So here, there's a verse which says something like, if you strive like really hard, like say even giving up food, and you're thinking like, oh, instantly I'm going to become a scholar, I'm going to become an adept, I'm going to have all of these great realizations and qualities. If you are really pushing yourself in that way, or even you stop eating, right? After 3 days, all of that effort, you'll think like, and you don't gain any huge realizations, all of that disappears. You sort of forget about it, or like, oh, forget about this doesn't really work. And then thinking that nothing has come about from that, you end up giving it all up, right? So rather than being like that, our efforts should be like a flowing river. We should make an effort in a way that is continuous and steady, that isn't in sort of these like intense periods where we think like, oh, I'm going to get this instantly, in a way where we're not even eating or we're not even taking care of our body, but rather we should make an effort on a daily basis. This is the quality of our mind. This is the nature of our mind, that the more we habituate ourselves to something, those causes of a similar type lead to something similar, right? So we have the ability to develop patience if we make an effort, if we habituate our minds to that. We also have the ability to develop anger stronger and stronger if that's what we allow our habits to go to. So we need to recognize that there's no other method than actually working with our mind, creating those kinds of habits in mind. And so if we take up the practices that will guarantee a good rebirth in the future, we can also be putting down imprints for those higher levels of liberation and the state of omniscience. And so on a daily basis, we should be trying to put these things into practice. We can't just like take medicine. We can't just flip a switch. There's no other method other than working with the mind, putting down these imprints, rejoicing when we do something good. If we think that we are going to get an instant change, we are going to be disappointed. And that is something that can cause us to turn away from the Dharma entirely. So thinking that I want to become a fully enlightened Buddha, someone who has eliminated all faults and developed all good qualities. And for that purpose, I'm listening to the Dharma with the intent of really contemplating it, thinking about it, and putting it into practice on a daily basis, such that I can strive to be of benefit to all sentient beings. And for that purpose, I'm now listening here to this Dharma. That's the kind of attitude that we should have for listening to the teachings.
Oh, yeah, Dharma to daily song. Soloka, Dimba. Simne Shindu, Mawani, Simshum, Imba Nidu dance at it all. Ngapchu Badera, Ngapchu Ngaptuna, and the Ngapchu Badember. Oh, take us. Ah,
Nyesambar the Shenla Jesu Chakpa, She Sumbadi.
Karisimba, Soloka, Sumchu Badero, Marve.
Ishitsabdun Mindra.
You stop there.
Nishitsabdin Yudra.
Oh, yeah. Get some guy.
Geshe-la's trying to jump ahead, so we're.
Then you into some the Joss much from that. This is a bit of all the injury. Near the task, it was such a time and that shouldn't say how yeah, that did that. And you stepped there. Oh, did it. Nursing.
Shenla Jesu Chakpa. Shenla Jesu Chakpa, She Sumbadi.
You should have there, solo can you step there?
Lare.
Did that, did it. Oh, yeah. Sumba changes, oh, yeah, that is there. Oh, did it. Tamadia Tosare. Sumba changes to be Chakwadan de Namdo. Imba te Gibam. The Mishela. Chakwada, oh, did this, that is Japsha. Tishan did it. Oh, yeah. Shenji Chadan Dembaye. Namdo Kani. Shandala. Chagdan se wa dirida dodara te tapos kepsha tinsere tene karsidos ne shenji chagdan dembayese shenla jesu chagdan dembayese ro namdo kanyi shendala chagdan se shendala chagba ase ti sidwa ti debadene karsidos ne sumba shenla jesu chagdan dembe namdo imba tenese Shenla Cheso Chakwe Namdo de Pankudoa. Tikar Sura Shenda Surasana, Jeba in a Pemeta Peme in a Jebalia, Shenja de Pankude Sunquare, Timaja Chikodesa. Oh, Shenla Cheso Chakwe and Debe Namdo Yibande, Jebam, Peme Shendala Chakwa dance, or Tipankudoa. Ya Tichilana.
So here, I believe we're just trying to find exactly where the mark to end was, but we'll be picking up with verse 427. And so here, this is kind of like this is the 43rd in this list of 57, and it's split into two, which is a little bit difficult in the way that it's translated. So I'll just read the whole verse, but it says, conceptuality in connection with infatuation is to dwell on how one might help or hurt others due to being affected by attachment or malice for them. So here, this is referring to the first of these two that come in this verse is referring to conceptuality in connection with infatuation, which is a kind of infatuation. In this case, it's specified as either like for a male or a female, having that kind of attachment to them. We need to give up that kind of attachment that is that comes from conceptuality in connection with our infatuation, that in this case is dwelling on how one might help others, I would say. But this is the first of these two.
Oh, the Chanju Samba, Rabdu Chunga, the Rabdu Chunga, Mayibatsu, Lishegi Wada. Oh, the Chasim Bangure Sera. Oh, When Chasim Bangure, the Inayako, when you come back on getting the Kevina, and go Nyambukomne, Mituba Kumbasa to Sheri Wangatu, do a natural Mituba Kumera, Mituba Kumne, Chaba, usually Chaba Mirosam. Jonathan Tombani, the Midabata to the Samtana Pera. Oh, that meant Louis Chashe Soso Chene. Roa, Louis Chashe, Chabe Yudi, Louis Chashe Soso Chene. Gingri la Sobat in the Samata, in the Songura. Chapashie don't that, Pajoti to win, but to them make it Kamara. Chashin to air Tondalia, and then Louis Chas Soso Chene. Louis Metawa that in the Mamusan, sometime or Mizawe Sunni Devil Soba that the letter. Lida Rubata to the Kagaka Kachin, Gigris to the Comiata today of Yara. Oh, yeah, to this one. No, what did you learn?
So here, this is for bodhisattvas, both who are ordained and not ordained. And here, when we think about getting rid of this kind of infatuation, wherein one, out of attachment to a particular object, feels that kind of infatuation for them, this often entails meditating on the unpleasantness of that object, or thinking about impermanence or emptiness even. But here, when we see descriptions of meditations on the unpleasantness of the object of attachment, in particular when it's the body of another being, there are meditations going through sort of splitting up the various parts of the body, going all the way down to the skeleton, like removing the flesh and so forth, and thinking about the various sort of the parts of the body, and really how disgusting they are when we would sort of take it all apart. Now, this isn't something where it's saying like the other person in this case is bad in some way, but rather by thinking about the kind of unpleasantness of their physical body, like going down to the bones, imagining them as skeletons and so forth, is something that is done in order to remove that kind of attachment. It's not as like a value judgment on the object.
Oh, yeah, oh, oh, the course Namdo Pa, Tawamato, Yukuram when around to prepare Yitu, the Yitu Mewa said to the Omara. This was a Semkipa, Tasha do net go Yitu, the Mewa, the Chapata Yugura. Oh, can do some Saturday, Yaguira. Oh, Timana Yako. Yuji Semlia, Tasi, Kana Kama to Cheko Tasi, a Chadogina, tell it capture my social navigate some question or yeah, some question or some tadira. Do that a contour of Maga situation or some question and Namsa, take on social capture some tangira. Oh, go to that, Masama, the Master say, some tangira. Then there's some Madanja, Koran charge you, capture my church. You shall, yeah, then the Kirk, same assembly, sobajaga so the chache. There is some conge chora, some meteor, mogu, some cortena, cocoran shasha, some corchu, and telling us some sembachi, demodange so the sitago. Carchi to us, you said, Encora Edura. Raja some Chinga Tangiora, Tigan, some Tadi and Yogora. Rajate some Madan, some Cosna Yushan, some Cora Temotanges to the Temotasa to the Shashana, Encora Edura. Tayochigo Mara, Kunti Maro, Raja Tinga de Raja Tigiora, Susu some Tangiora, mother. What in this some Tangiora, Tadusha. Yeah, Tigisona.
So here, when we have like an object that we see as pleasant, for example, we should recognize that being designated by our conceptuality as being pleasant, it doesn't exist as such from the side of the object. So contemplating in this way, we can get out of the kind of process whereby when we see something as pleasant, we allow ourselves to sort of give into that, we will have all kinds of thoughts that sort of back that up, that reinforce that idea that, oh, this thing is really pleasant from its own side. Or for example, when we have someone that we don't like, that we're angry with, and we think about them, and then we use all sorts of different thoughts backing that up. Oh yeah, they did this. Oh, I don't like them because of this. And we sort of perpetuate that, that affliction. But if we're able to either counteract it through our way of thinking, seeing it as being merely designated by conceptuality, or sort of step back, get out of the process of that anger thinking or that kind of attachment thinking, and observe it like we're sort of watching a movie, then these things naturally disappear. They naturally dissipate. But it is our mind that causes these things to continue on and sort of reinforces them through the thinking that backs up that sort of initial grasping. So if we instead step back from that, sort of use part of the mind to observe itself and see how it isn't the case that this is like in accordance with reality, then we can stop that continuity. We can be kind of block those afflictions that would naturally arise for us, and stop the process of like backing them up with our thinking.
Oh yeah, that's all. Nursing people matter. Nursing nursing require the pen and the pen symbol. Oh, take us to those. Shifu Shishibata, Tranganga, doing the Shifu Shishibata. Nursing Rebani, any day, Pembadamida, or midday too sooner. Take a social pendo, you was a marriage, a corrector. Pendo, you was in a college, trash the research. Pendo Mevasina, Missouri, Tegra, or the message, Jessiora. Mi pento matos Namsan, and Gazo, Tatan Conatera. So coe de cardo da gira. The coe cardo te gen, te the temperature milia, Geshe, the Kagachura. Tende members of Cochida, Michilena, Kundam Santin, Chori, Soso Pento, Catlegido, Dingazo Semba Conatera, Malacoya Cardo, said Michi Tusana, Teleton Sosoya, call it any Pento Lea Cardo, Dagamato City. Quoted a co-pento came in the Poltus. Poltus and the Jagakis. That's why to Mirisa, now we use Shara. Tindes you may ask a coach than me, but then there is cheaper of Chitata, Chibasita, or Esungara. Or Tinyati, maybe any Shanda may in the society of matter. Tambunine, Miton Tozamine. Make some Jatana, Transi Chamber, Jetta, Jesse, which is a taco. Tambune, Cassandra, the coach 6 years. That I'll get out, you may some good. Yeah, there's some commanders, huh? There's some by Pemba, Pemba, Semba was ra. Don't never get no water, taking much share, quote of some Pemba teacher, Contusai, Yankayora, or the teacher may some good. Yeah, teach Lana.
So next in this same verse 427, the second half of it, kind of, it then comes the 44th of these 57 faults, which we could say is like having a sort of a malice, or literally like sort of contacting malice. Now here, this then says, being affected by malice for them, we sort of look upon others as though, will they help me or will they hurt me? So here, this is kind of an attitude of maliciousness, but is really focused on when we see others, we immediately look at them as like, well, what can they do for me? Are they going to benefit me, or are they going to harm me? We look at others not in a way where we just see them as human, or we approach them as pleasant. Like if we think that we can get something from somebody, or that they can achieve some of our aims, we'll be nice, say hi, smile at them. If it looks like they're not going to be helpful to us, we sort of disregard them. We just completely ignore them. We don't have this kind of attitude wherein we see all sentient beings as just human, right? It's more as though our normal way is looking at others of like, well, what do I get out of them? What do I need from them? If they're not helpful to us, then we sort of just cast them aside. Or if we don't like the way that they look, we'll sort of think like they're our enemy immediately. And so here, this kind of, and again, conceptuality in connection with, we could say, malice, is this sort of dwelling on how one might help or hurt others, really based upon our own needs, like thinking about, well, what am I going to get out of them? So here, rather than looking at sentient beings like that, the way that we should look at all is equally, as like looking at them with honesty, with love, with a kind of integrity, and what could I do for them? Not in the way that we normally do, sort of thinking like, well, what are they going to do for me? What am I going to get out of this person?
Oh yeah, that's the Tati chela kardosa meka temba meba yi se tiwa meka se kawu meba se ene yi di tembo de meba ko meka samlo mambo ko eri singira namju na shi che samlo ma temba se ma temba se meka temba meba yi sam shichu shenga ba de to meka we se ko kabu mene temba meba yi namju na shi tata tembo chimba de se ko chagda da ko do da mambo tempo mebe se sem chudura o tende mebe se ure sungara meka se tatunda mi sutu na ko meka che mera meka che na ni sem tempo mebe se ko telia shenda som ma ko yongura ndaba ke ta ke che she ne ke che tu che she ta kang yongura o tire to ya ti che thado nyokwa ti che lamna o ale ti che lapshana.
So then the next, the 45th, comes in the first line of of 428, wherein it says, erratic displeasure is an unsteady mind. So here, when we see others and sort of have a dislike for them, that makes our mind kind of unstable, unsteady. When we are looking at others and we immediately feel a kind of dislike towards them, and here translated as erratic displeasure, is an unsteady mind. That means that there's no sort of steadiness to our mind, stability.
Oh yeah, tati chela thado nyokbe yi no se do pajo de thado ro che ya me chi ya wa chi chi tong yi ne den jo da yuen de da chi den de sin de thado che ora mu shi ju ban de be nyokbe yi no se thado che ro so so la yuen de da chi ka re na den jo da den de chane ko ya yo de ya thado che che thado nyokba chuban de be thado de be se ora rang de shen sha ge wa ge nyokbe yi no se ne sem yo do ra thado chi chi ma ra ngo de chen nam ju ga ne che su yi ra che ro shen li ya ka re na te le che su yi ra che ura ma to nam ju ga du lo jo chen ge ri chi na ya ka re ne pho jo de ya ga do na o de ga ko lo jo chen de pe ang ge ya bu le che ba ya bu do asam nga tende che thom ne ya bu do asam na che su yi ra che khami ya ta su de pa pa ne Kamiyata Kadami Yaga Chingatil Tower, Tuga Chingatil Taju Marsera, Kamiya Wichingatil Yata Ures, Kami the Wichingatil Mata Ju Marsa Sursira, or the Venyoga Yinosa, Dira, the Venyoga Yinosa, oh, did Diaga Dosa, Tato, Yoga Yinosa, the Tado again, Pajo de Semyon, Yamoshe, Sim Samachagmara. Kodunga je trato de kakari ne shenda kanga yungura yi nyong du de sigora yi nam jine shi ba de che ko yi tu shu da o ti che ne o ti lam na
Mm. So then 46th, we have next, and here this translation says, desiring union is a mind that is stained. Now here, this is the way Geshe is reading it, it's really out of jealousy or out of envy, or sort of desire, or clinging to the things that we want. Out of a kind of desire, we feel jealousy towards others, whether it's qualities or things that they have and so forth. And that is really something that dirties, that sullies or stains our mind. When we see a good qualities or others having good things, we should rejoice in that. Like if we're someone who is trying to study and learn, we should look up to those that, say, get higher marks, that have more learning than us. Rather than feeling a kind of jealousy, we should look up to them as being like an example. So there's a kind of Tibetan saying about this, that we shouldn't, we don't want to look down upon others or feel a kind of envy towards them, but rather we should look up to them as being a sort of an aim that we are striving for. When we feel a kind of jealousy toward others and envy, that is something that dirties our mind, that sullies our mind, and we should avoid that kind of jealousy that comes from desire and stains our mind.
o ya ta de kangal sha so ra lungba na de kimje de chi na kimje pajo chongba pajo su jo na chi li ya wo yong de ko cha do che de ka ri na yong so ra lungba na yong so ra lungba chi li ya wo che na ko ya wo do de ga se ko kon jo kan de shu do ngan jo tin de che wo se na ke me do kami ya da chi ya wo se ra o ko le ya wo den du che be na ko le ya wo me na sam gi ra den du chi mai be she ra ko che su ra che 야, 야제 줘야래. 지금실 제수이란 제 지금도 소소 줘야 탑시 전에 경계 오마라. 만져 건전하시 하고 줘야 저거래 삼사. 디전되어라. 저도 지도는 버저게 마 누구 차나 삼게라. 라야가 차 지구도 마마를 신의 삼태 저라. 어디 무슨야 되실라나.
So this kind of jealousy can happen on all different kinds of levels. It could be between neighbors or between countries and so forth. And rather than having that sort of jealous attitude wherein you're kind of competitive with another, if you see that others are doing well, like whether it's your neighbors, you should think, oh, that's something that I could strive for. When we have a kind of jealousy or competitiveness, when it is between countries and so forth, there's this desire to sort of like take others down, that you don't appreciate what is good in them, but rather you want to bring them down, rather than having this attitude of thinking, oh, that's good, and we should try to improve ourselves or bring ourselves toward that. When it comes to a kind of attitude of jealousy or competitiveness, there's this often wanting to bring others down, rather than this sense of looking up to them in a way that can cause our own improvement.
Oh yeah, 다 되다. nomba chomba mebe lu rebe. nomba chomba mebe lu kilu tenje lelo yesa. O tate kalse do sene shibju shibden ba de redo. Nyomle nese. Nyomle se de ko lelo sigara lelo te sigara. Nyomle ne kewala chomba mebe kilu be tenje lelo yin osa. Nyomle se lelo che de sigara. Ne kewala so shawa sangbuto ko chonge marwa. Kilu bose kilenya busigra ko tawa gore ko te mato che tendele ko chomba da kawa meke chora otili sigara. Chomba nyom yomba ne se tamate Nyomba Zamba Mebe List, Nyomle Secretary. The Chundri Mebe, Kilube Lelo Resera. Kewecha was yet a local Medevasete, young Medusa, Nang Tankishora. Oh, the Tumba Yombane, Kewala Zamba Mebe, Kilube, Tangilelo, Yinosa, Tishlana.
And then the 47th comes in the second half of verse 428, where it says, lassitude is the laziness of one who lacks energy. It comes from being physically listless. So here, this is really kind of lacking in any kind of effort toward virtuous or positive sorts of things. So not this kind of lassitude or sloth is something wherein, or sluggishness, we could say, is a kind of attitude wherein one doesn't make, one is lazy with respect to having effort in virtue. And that's really the meaning of being sort of lazy or sluggish.
Oh, yeah. Then Jura said, Jura said. Jura Kara Juras, Nyamogi Wangi, Luda, Kado Jura was. Oh, she mirror to Karina, she Tanti Madichonsona. And the Konduga Jetado Karina Nyamogi Wangi Sigara. Judu, there's a Kara Juras, Nyamogi Luda, Kado Juas, Legion Do Medawa Theatre. Now, when the case of Damadas, Namju Damada Theatre, or Tindisijo Maresum Gara. And Jura, the Jabatinaka, Shifu Javara, Jura ne Yamumbe Wangi ne Ludangane, Jura was. Lunga Namju Medate, Namsa. What temple thought in a summa, Yaja Service Mato, thoughts in Dimmer and Namsan, Tongan Namju Medate, Connected Madrasa to District Marisagara. Timachanico Simnich, somebody or Tindri Marisam, somebody, Pazuke Nugumara. Oh, Lungane, Matumba. Mako and Namju to Matumba, so that's it. Yeah, it is Luna.
Then next in the first half of 429 is the 48th of these, which is affect. So affect is the transformation of body and face that occurs through negative mental states. So here, this is really the kind of transformation of both our sort of, like, say we encounter someone and something seems not right to us. And so therefore, we sort of show the aspect of our displeasure. We have the kind of affect that we are upset, or that we are angry, or that whatever they did was not right. So rather than immediately kind of showing that through our face, our body, our way of speaking even, we should have patience with this. We should have patience with those kinds of situations that seem off, not immediately sort of show our affect or show the kind of control of our afflictive emotions in terms of our physical or verbal affect.
Oh, yeah. That's same Medubas. Same Medubas. Kalasani Madubas, Chitangtua. Kalasani Madu. Take us same Medubas. Satrabas, Kalamanga Sashara. Shimbudu subject to go back Kangamba Sashara. And the Utai Kabuche teacher. Satrabas. Se Medubas, stronger, same Meduba. Same Medubas, Kasha, Kala Satrani. Lu Medewa in Barshatus. Sobo de Mabsara, Mangasana, Utam Medone, Sobo Yobushavira. No, Tin Jabashatu Karshatusana. Shiju Shikuba de Redo. Some Medebane Satrabe. Lu Medewa in Barshatus. Kala Satran and Lu Tebumeba, Sobo de Website, Sir. Tati Karsivarasana. Sobo Tebumeba, Kote Jake Maru Kasra, Panjas. Marwati Nibake Maratas, Koran Sogumeda Sarase, Panzeti Marwasana, Timaresera. Kalasata to Dungam Setan and Magasavi or Desera, Sobolia Pemba in some Tata Sagu, some Geomara, or Shaja Setan Magasasara, or Trekala Shimbudu Mata Sago, some Mata Sasha and Sogumeta Yagayora. What is your 시고바 사메데바네 사트베 르메데와이 바세 르메데와샤나 담보데데 꿀로데 마데라 덩암셔제 고 칼라티 심부터 마보사고 삼티 마데라 메테제 데고 야네 사트베 르메데와샤나 되게 좀 마보 연구도 땡이지 고미야다 개와체를 껴 연구를 스테방으로서 가셔디나 연구도 코라셰 가셔 제부디 셰베선도 가셔 규디 셰베선도 연구했어라 다들 교단 대부니가 세서라 이 꿀롱데 자시부지 사고 삼등함 심부셔더라 르메데와 샤발 때는 땡이지 고미야다 대설껴지 디방으로서 저도 고도라 야디스 어디스라는
So then next is physical discomfort comes from eating too much food, is physical sluggishness. Here, this actually is listed as like not wanting to eat, and which really is coming from not from eating too much food. So when we eat until we are too full, this has a physical effect, like maybe our breathing becomes more difficult and so forth. The body becomes kind of sluggish and so forth, uncomfortable. And so really this is coming from the incorrect initial motivation, having this kind of greediness of thinking like, ooh, there's this really tasty food, and rather than eating just enough, just what you need, you keep eating more and more out of that kind of desire, that kind of greediness. And so the initial motivation is the problem, right? This physical discomfort and sluggishness that comes about from eating too much food. That eating too much food is really motivated by that kind of greed, that kind of wanting, because you think, oh, this is so tasty. And so that initial motivation is faulty. And then this creates the kinds of conditions that are not good for, say, developing meditative stabilization, when your body is too sort of sluggish or overcome by that kind of physical discomfort from overeating. So here, some of these faults are talked about in a context. I mean, someone might think like, well, what physical discomfort, how is that a fault? But really, it's talking about that initial motivation, when you're driven by that kind of greediness, really wanting all of that food, and then overeat, that then in turn that cause leads to this result of this kind of physical discomfort and sluggishness, which again are obstacles to being able to develop things like meditative stabilization.
Oh yeah. 다들에도 샘 신도 마원이 있어더라. 샘내 신도 마원이 있어야 샘 신도 마와서 어떤 데 처음에 와서 가르치 그래서는 샘 신도 마원이 샘 shum바이 마니도 다시 싸워더라. 이 가르치도서는 내가 ngabshu 받으래도 장거들 샘내 신도 마원이니 샘 신도 마원이 있어도 심수 차는 마바 소소 봐 샘도 해서 그 다음에 가끔 줘서 말해서 가끔 연구 말해서 삼사시오라 샘 신도 마원이니 그래 대샘 shum방이도 나도 샘 심수 차야 샘마 심수 차 당에 가게 된 망보 연구도 안 가셔 또서 맨데도 당에 가게 용사 말해서 소소 봐 매단 샘마 무네 지 제고 삼사 내가 제고 삼사 심수 맹게 차도네 가게 용사 말해서 용사 말해서 소소로 매바시기도 하대 도슈에도 할래나네 당일에 매벨레로서데 내 가게 좀 말해서나 소소 봐 매르던 거라 들에 도요 마땅에 가게 좀 말해서 지대다 최가래에서 요르다 지대 내가르지 당에 가게 좀 말해서면 심수 차도네 가게 지금 말하고 저 말아 근데 그 야드라게 말 뚜르뚜르라 엉에 중국의 지체고로 만도 다 대교 말해서면 그 지체로라 대조에나 야르라 기회 저와이나 때를 당에 그게 용좀 먼저 섬겨 말했어라 심수 맞아베셔라 당일에 예배 소소소소래 nhập 지치고라 들레도요 레르나는 도슈데라 소소소소랴 당에 그게 용 말을 삼사잖아 매워게 요 말아 가리오나 강가 찍배도 연구 말아 산제네시 강가도 연구 말아 소소제네 제 연구로 심수야 깨고라 단데 누가 중소나 소소 말을 전도 다 들려잖아 야부치고 삼사 심수야 쳐를 당고라 제가 저 가르쳐라 Lumbala Torajon, the Namjina Shetter, because she said, Lumbala Torajon, the Sani Bessim China, but it was on something, Drama to Tesha Samtan Tegra, Semuk Degra. Tako Tsare Chun Sasus, Takarjaga says, Mahomba the Samtangura. Thing as a Nima, Yeshe Sajere. Tawarumbuche, Nima. Yetong abja sanje nyangale dene lo yetong abja ko chije se jagal pera o te du san senske nensi de se ke nangbe de senal pera ne she sa chiri samle o te pe ne ko zo tirpa de chinga zo chema yo de pe upa de wa chi singa zo labdol ya nyam do le ga je pe ke ba chambure o kuni ne nangbe de senal senske nensi de professor wa kundi de shi te chene kundi pepe titu tu trouble shida yora kambe na du sapet na sa shibichi nangira yo tiende chima tene lo kashe modo chiyo mara kana pape kimne tsu longba kanga shoche peche pera rubichi che pera otepe dian konzo jaga dogo yora tuwachi ta karishe wana asam konzo sembre chonsi do kame kade shori ngema na shipet kyo trouble che ti shue yo mara tape longba sho ne togu shibichi pera Pega jagado karisho san sembrechos pega do ngema da chiboreje ke je sheta kame sunda da kanga konzo hala sero ke ken jo chi me do sa tong nam ju da kanga ngema na shi ke to do kemo ke ma to tabe sem ju chaya re jora timde che me do se do o ti so di ko ra tu bu chung de chung sa ra ta tu bu chung sam ti shi sang da ne ti ma se mu do ra Shanda Chiju Tangi Koromaro, and Alzo in the Tuguda Chonsa, Takashi, Tanti Masusa, Tisha Sosa Sebren Sujitera. The Chonsara, the Chonsara, Takarchega, Mahomba, the Samutankugara. Sati Chonsara, the Shachi Samutana, Tungashi Samutana, Sam Corto Mara. Tinashan Araza Samachibara. So to where is Chona, to a Chonso, some Tisha Samutana Mera. That Chonsara, Takarchegasa, Tashi Karche, and those Tisamutara. Loyal Nindu ya Chiraj over Mother Peshum Drazi of Mara, or the Shigda. Semne Sendu Mawa Yes, Simsupani, Bertanse, King of Subadra, Semne Sendu Mawa Nini, Sem Shumba in Bagidu Tendo, Sem Shum the Kage, Chutaji, then Shaw, calling the Kage Young Mara Samsasent. What is Tunia?
So then next we have in the second half of verse, or no, sorry, the first half of verse 430 it is taught that the state of extreme mental dejection is mental depression. So here, this kind of extreme mental dejection, where we have this thought, I mean, say something inauspicious or sort of something not right happens, and we think like, oh, I can't do anything, nothing good is going to come about with for me. We have a little bit of difficulty and begin disparaging ourselves, criticizing yourselves. This is something that is really one of the worst forms of laziness when it comes to either trying to accomplish something that is worldly or spiritual, whatever it might be. If you have that kind of attitude, there's no way that you will be able to do anything. When you sort of remain in that state of like darkness, of kind of delusion, thinking like, oh, this bad thing happened, or this isn't right, and so forth, then there's no way to improve at all. But if you have a kind of mental strength, mental fortitude that thinks, well, I'm going to make an effort at this, whether it's like gaining wealth or whether it's developing spiritual qualities, one has to have that kind of spirit of wanting to try, wanting to make an effort. If we get into this kind of laziness, and this is why it is called the worst kind of laziness, of self-disparagement, we preclude ourselves from being able to improve or being able to do anything that is good. So we need to have some confidence in ourselves, some belief in our own abilities, and really a kind of mental strength, thinking like, oh, I can do good things. If something bad happens to us and we just stay there thinking like, oh, this is so bad, this bad thing happened, and we get really we get really dejected or sort of depressed about it, then there's no way that we can remove ourselves from that situation, that we can improve what is happening at all. But if we have this sense of, okay, well, this bad thing happened, but now what? What am I going to do in the future? And have that kind of confidence, then that's really the way in which we can handle whatever comes our way. So I think I've told this story before, but there is an example from His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who had gone to India 2,500 years after the passing of the Buddha, and met with some various scholars in India, including a great sort of Sanskrit scholar. And when he met the Dalai Lama, he was so, impressed, when one could say, by his sort of happiness, his lightheartedness, his very cheery disposition. And so, several years later, when His Holiness had to escape Tibet and came back to India, the same scholar went to meet him and thought, like, oh, I wonder what he's going to be like now. He's lost his country, he's in this very difficult situation, and sort of had this concern upon going to meet him as what he would be like then after all of this kind of tragedy. And he was amazed to find that His Holiness was exactly the same, right? He had the same sort of cheery disposition, his affect, he was smiling and laughing and so forth. And it's not as though he doesn't acknowledge the bad that had happened, but you can't remain in that kind of state of thinking, oh, this bad thing happened, and just be really dejected and depressed about it. But rather, we acknowledge that there's a bad situation, and then we think, well, what can we do to get out of this? What do I do for the future? And so we need to create in ourselves, when bad things happen, the ability to really think about our own capabilities and what we can do to get past that situation. We need to create a kind of mental fortitude rather than giving in to this kind of extreme mental dejection.
뭐야? 보시면 건드나. 뭐야? 다들
Depala Dumba.
뭐야? 다들 되게 연대 나타나, 是吧?
Lare.
연대 나타나. 대바 된도 내려 이사. 되게 연대 나타나, 서더라. 그 가르치고래서나 마치바 대발은 dem바식도 대발은 dem바. 대배 연대 수트 지루래셔서 소바테 소리야. 차바식고는 dem바셔서 되든세래 dem바. 어디까지도 되게 연대 나타나. 수트 지루래셔서 소바 연대 나타서려. 대바 된도 녀와니서 대소라 현재 차네. 대니체 탑시체 대소라 아시도. 내가 중간에 받으셔. 대발한 dem바네세. 대발한 dem바스 가서는 대형아들이야. 애니 차네. 뒤 용에 된다도. 벤조 용에 된다래. 탑시체래. dem바는 대외 연대가들은 대바. 된도녀니 도서. 야, 뒤질라나.
So then next we have longing for the desirable is yearning for experiences of the five sensory objects. So here, this is really, yearning or longing for those kinds of desirable objects, form, sound, smell, taste, touch, and so forth, striving for those based upon being attached to or kind of clinging to the objects of the five senses, making an effort to get those, whether it's wealth or other kinds of things that we have an attachment to. This is then the 51st of these 57. So longing for the desirable is yearning for experiences of the five sensory objects. And this comes in the last half of verse 430.
뭐야? 안되지래. 다들 그거 알려주시나. 대발은 dem바테 살시라. 다 대셔야 간다. 내생 다다 저다 제사 쇼라 뜻은 되면 봐서 아니 도배셔라 내배심 주굴레네 중앙에 있어 어디 다들 갈수도서나 내제 내봐 어디 먹으셔 저도 오면 좀 많이 받으려도 내서 내 다게 저골라 소소다 소소도 년대도 소리서라다니 저보다 다게 다 숨지 소소 저거 년제야 가르치나 아니 다게 저거다 다게 메가서 자숨치 어때서야 아니 다를 너가 제소 제도 제반 교로세 다게 저도서야 내가 제소 내가 제거를 단다 지거를 마음발을 지거를 삼 뭐가세 내가 소소 메가서 자도서야 그 편도식도 로봇식도 나의 로봇에서 단다 로봇도 마음발을 로봇식을 삼 심메가 채워라 근데 재미로 세던다도 이번 내심시도 내심시 가는 내심시고래서나 내심내 다게 쪼보다 다게 자에 쳐라 뒤숨도스 나는 데베트나 로바체서 단다시도 마음발라 지그래서 나졸이야 난 데베트나 너바체 단다시도 마음발라 지그래서 안심 추도라 뒤숨도 다게 녀라 소발라 너바체도 제반 요로 냠도 또배 왕게 달라페 도소 도바 요로 냠도 네샤라 네버 셈베 규쿠레 중앙에 놓으세 규쿠도아 알레 네만에 그 네바 체스 다다시 마음발지 아주 가사도 줄야 네마 데베툴레 그 교체를 단단 내가 제기도 마음발 내가 제스 나중 메가서도 그 요거 로봇식도 네마 로봇이 단단 로봇이 마음발 로봇이 그래서 근데 섬을 다는 셈메가 저기라 어떤데 셈메로서 야 누나도 나중 아니 봐대 내심 다른 말로는 되면 야 어때 situation
So then next we have in verse 431, harmful intent arises from 9 causes. It is the intent to harm others on the part of one who is concerned about some misfortune in the 3 times with regard to oneself, one's friends, or one's enemies. So here, harmful intent is the 52nd of these 57 faults. And so here we have then these 3 kind of categories of you, your friends, those that you love, and those that are your enemies. And there is, with respect to then the 3 times, the thought of like, oh, well, I was harmed, I'm being harmed, I will be harmed, or my friends were harmed, are being harmed, will be harmed, or my enemies were benefited, are being benefited, or will be benefited. And that causes us to be unhappy, right? So we have those 3 kind of categories of beings, and the 3 times, what has happened in the past, what is happening in the present, and what will happen in the future. And our minds get disturbed by that, right? If those that, like myself, is harmed, or was harmed, or will be harmed, or as well as those that I like, those that I consider to be my friends on my side, and they were harmed, are being harmed, or will be harmed in the future, as well as the ones that I don't like those beings that are considered my enemies. If they are benefited, were benefited by someone, or will be benefited, these kinds of situations cause us to become unhappy. They disturb our mind, and out of that sort of mental disturbance comes this harmful intent towards others. So we don't like it, or we have this kind of unhappiness that then fuels into our harmful intent.
뭐야 다 lösüm 지시를 레들와 강의 되는 못 봐오 시도 어디 가르치는 것 중에 선바들을 lösüm 지배시를 레들와래 체면도봐 강의 받더니 못 봐오셔 어디 가르쳐도서나 lösüm 지시를 lö다심 이거 집으로 찾아는 길러니 붙여줘라 지시 레들와서 내가 제거야 강가야 레들와 강의 되는 못 봐오셔 아니 이 목대 목바셔서 가서 목바셔 이 목바 들려야 아니 그 당가 좀 말씀 받아 Lusimchi Mesire, Le, Delwale, Che Medeva Kanye Batani Mowa, Le Lo Chasere Zeto, Mupasete. What is Lana?
So then we have in the first half of verse 432, dullness is a state of inactivity due to physical and mental heaviness. Here, when the sort of mind and body are heavy with this kind of dullness, then one doesn't engage in various activities. Whatever it is that one might want to do, you're not going to do due to this kind of physical and mental heaviness. So here, this is considered to be a part of laziness, this kind of state of dullness.
Mika Shiba Naya Shiba Naya Shiba Che Shiba Luji Shiba Yiji Shiba Yor Namshi Tsotu Yuli Ya and then Juba La Rama Bachigora, Yula Juk Marwa. By Yiji Shiba Milam de Tante Mato Yungon and Namjuton to Jambata Tinder Mevashagara. Juksi to Yula Juba Juya Mevachako Tushagara. Mika Tona and Nikuyo Marwa. Rexati Regi and Nikuyo Marwa. Make a shiba Yesu Tunguma Tati Rorecha Ganga Tungu Mara. Yiji Shiba the Chunam Jutan the Tungum Nikune. Ni tabu da kuna melam tangra, ni tabu kuna melam tang yomara. Oh, this is all. Shiba ni de se, ni kuete. Jushi to Yula Juba Rama Bashavas. Jush ni de Chakaras, Yula Juba Shiba to Bute. Yula Jumuchu Rameba, Juchu Maresivara. Janini Kura, Mato, Jushi, Yula Junani Kuyomara. Oh, Jibber. Anything up to Nanga but the Redwa, your mother. Oh, Kavalesa. Napchunga Shiba, Nini de Jushi to you, Rameba Chetani, Mambo Kawashena. Anything is a complete Lelo Taba, Shota Jidaniga Legacy Marwa. Nilakata, Kashani, Kaduna, Nini, Kabuchidwa. Or Jane, Sopon of the Shah. Legacy, Tsunduta, Jide Lega the Kanga. Yabuchim to get her. Oh, Tishida. Ya Tishilana.
So then here, so that was the 53rd, and then the 54th is sleep. So here, drowsiness is a sleepiness. So here, this is really not just being sleepy, but being in that state of sleep. The root verse itself is quite terse. It uses the same word, saying sort of sleep is sleep. And this is a state in which all of our six consciousnesses are sort of withdrawn such that they don't have the faculty of engaging with objects. So here, when we are asleep, none of our various consciousnesses, our visual consciousness, our auditory consciousness, our olfactory consciousness, gustatory consciousness, or bodily consciousness, even our mental consciousness doesn't engage in the same kinds of objects as it normally would. We can have a sort of dreaming mind, but that's a little bit different. If we are seeing something, we are not sleeping, right? Or if our body is actually feeling something, we are not sleeping. And although it is the case that when we sleep, and if we're in a sort of lighter sleep, we might have dreams. When we are in a very heavy sleep, we don't even have dreams. So here, if one is engaging in objects, you have to be awake. But when you are in this state of sleep, all of those kinds of consciousnesses are withdrawn from their normal objects. And if you like to sleep a lot, this can contribute to a kind of laziness. It acts as an obstacle to being able to have joyous effort, sort of zeal in our practice, as well as it's an obstacle to developing meditative stabilization. But if you're really into sleeping and you're just kind of constantly in this sort of stupor of sleep, even worldly activities you won't be successful with. So sleep is a kind of sluggishness or laziness, and this is why it is referred to as a fault here.
Kalala soba tinte mangbushi sa, yuwa. Eni nyoptowa cha, eni dhamida samshenda tinte, yu dhamida kasikali ya ku tingi kumiyala soba tizul kyanchi wara, shenda kasikali kanjumaji kutudu wara. Kuba ni lusim rabtu mashiwa wasi, kuba te sem shiwa, tingi kumiyala kiwe chawa tuwela kyanchi wara, kanjumaji shenda sem kasikali tudu wara. Bati Nganga padre, Kurbane Segi, Jagbe Lusim, Rabtu Mashivasu, Kala Mambosene, Kurba Mamu, King the Community Tinderia, Yopto Chana Yungumata, Shenda Tindera, some quarter good essay, or the Bango essay at the Daresha. Tiskuna.
So if you really enjoy sleeping and sleep a lot, this is really an obstacle to engaging in virtue. It's an obstacle to developing meditative stabilization. And so this is why it's listed as one of these faults that is to be abandoned. And then next is restlessness. This is the same word as we sometimes use as like agitation or excitement in the context of developing meditative concentration. And here, this can come about due to a variety of factors, including like overeating. So here, restlessness is a lack of physical and mental tranquility. So this is something that is said to be a fault to developing meditative concentration, as well as to engaging in virtues. If you're sort of restless and the mind is going all over the place, then one won't focus on doing virtuous activities or be able to engage in meditative concentration, meditative stabilization. So restlessness it can come about through like eating too much food, and the body and mind become lacking a kind of tranquility that is good for developing a good practice, engaging in virtue, engaging in meditative stabilization, and so forth. So that's the 55th of these.
Oh, yeah. Don't give us it, give us. Jabas, never chebe, just so Chawa member says any much motivation. Give a cheshora, Tatin Mason, some Josim Cheshire. Jaba never cheva, give us serious. She don't want it, and it gave the Mason son, Chemako, some de Mambo Sigora, Tangent, no Lucim Chess and Mason son. Some days she said, and a Sigora. Oh, they can see us in Natuba, Natuba. Jeba ne chawa ngenpa cheba la jeba shi tongwa le chungwa. Ti chawa ngenpa cheba la jeba che ne semmi jiba chagra. Semde chung semle tongwa me jiba chungwa. O ti chungwa ina ne tingi zi kome la soba kewa tuwe li ya neba chigara. O ti chani shekwa. Jeba ngenpa jeba asi tangdwa. Ngenpa ri che la jeba si chawa ngenpa cheba ngenpa chi matiba cheba tang jeba che. Shi tongwa le chungwa. Nyama cheba tegi chi ne simba meji bise tunge mambu yungora ko simba meji bise tunge nyangyora ata te dima sosa o te ngabzu nga tukpa tirisen jeba ne chawa nyamba cheba lan jeba chi tongwa le chwa ne simde sechi cheda ne kewa tuba la parshe chigira ke simde che te sechi samurta dina ne kewa tuwe ta te sol parshe chigora te pangku resi te mabana te wage ne kewa tuba le kyan chigira resi kui chane pa kabe sunti chigita. Yeah, what is gonna?
So then next, 56th is regret. So here, regret is to lament one's negative activities. It arises from agonizing about them later. So having this thought of like we've done something and like, oh, that's not okay, and to continue to ruminate about that, to think about it again and again, like, oh, that was such a big mistake. Oh, I really shouldn't have done that, and so forth. That kind of regret or sort of rumination on it makes us worry and suffer and be unhappy, right? It creates a kind of agonizing over those things that we have done. And so if we have this kind of experience wherein we regret something that was negative that we've done and later, again, sort of just agonize over it, this creates a lot of worry and it becomes an impediment, an obstacle to our doing virtuous actions. Rather than making our efforts at virtue, we are just sort of caught up worrying about that thing that we did in the past, like, oh, that wasn't good. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. Oh, that was such a mistake. So here, this is the 56th of these, which is regret in the sense of agonizing over one's past activities.
뭐야? 그 말해서 뭐래? 대단 군조 숨소라서도 덴바시다 군조 숨을 쏘발라서도 네 그래서 로남예네 대소마서 군조 숨때 덴바인다 많이 섬로 덴바시시에도다 간다이나 섬 군조 숨산제 군조 치 근데 군조라 쏘바 덴바인나 많이 섬 어떻게 대좀사야 될 수도 대단 군조 숨소라 로남예네 대소마 로남예 이나마히 배시매 이마매도 배시 예수 태좀을 숨용게 봐 찬양배 태좀서 뜬줄기 태좀 뜨매주기 태좀 숨용거라 군조들 땐바 이나마나 좀 찬양배치니 찬양배 태좀서라 군조 숨 배치 땐바 이래서는 된다고네 돌파 줄게요라 배 타시와 말이 뜬줄태서 배치 땐바 이제 말에 섬는 뜨매주기 태좀서라 뜬마이 배sol파 줄도거라 뜻이거라 덴바다 군조 숨다 렌데라 소발라 로 남바니니 나좀바 태좀 모셔라 태좀 세시 용도 태좀 세다 덴다 군조 숨소라 로 남바니 태좀 남바니 세다 어쩌지 어쩌네 같은다 덴바다 군조 숨다 렌데라 소발라 요나 메나 삼코 예발이 이치네 세다 태좀 사다나 아티고 가서래 본사를 되어라. 뭐 어찌시구나 야.
So
뭐야.
then the 57th comes here in the second half of 433, where it says, doubt is to be of two minds about the four truths of the Aryas, the three jewels, and so on. So here, this kind of a split mind, doubt is something where it says, is it this or is it not? Is this true? Is this not? Like with particularly here with respect to the four truths of the Aryas or the three jewels and so forth, one can have different kinds of doubt about them. They're generally said to be three kinds of doubt. We could have a sort of equal doubt where we think, well, maybe they're true, maybe they're not true. Or there could be doubt tending towards the factual, tending towards what is actually true, and the doubt that tends towards the counterfactual or that which is not true. So here, if you think oh, the three jewels probably are a real source of refuge, that would be doubt tending towards the factual. Or if you think that, oh, you know, the four truths probably aren't accurate, that's probably not true, then that would be doubt tending towards the non-factual. So here, to have this kind of a split mind, the mind in these like two minds about something, if you remain in that state without having say confidence in the Four Noble Truths or in the three jewels, then this is an impediment to one's practice. So having that kind of doubt then is something to be abandoned.
Oh yeah. 어떤 업주 맵든지 시사르다. 맵주 맵든 못해 갈 수도 있나. 맵주 저든 못해다 내 폐지 빵자에 있을 참아 빵자 빵구를 시거라. 다이나 이거 시에도상 같이 심중 외성화 참마도 매부터 도 심중 신고서 그래서 방자 임마에 따야돼 방자 유지배 전에다 야야는 대부 임배 전에다 어떤데 섬을다는 शे고 됐어도 전부터다는 배지 방자 일라서 같이 심중을 송하나 심중 거랑 거 송데 샤샤부터 된도세 어딜 따져셔서 나야 니베 주다 야나 심중데 방자데 요나 교티레스 교티 요나데 용거리 방고레스 타다다 야나로 대부분 송하잖아 교티 방고레스 텐들 거고레스 하지도와 야 된디무시 어디 있구나.
So then those are the 57 of these faults. And these are generally distinguished by being 57 things that one is to be, one is to abandon. Now, sometimes it would appear as though it's merely identifying a particular mental factor. However, this is explained in such a way as it sort of explains the cause of the fault as well as the sort of faulty results that come from that. So investigating in that way, one should make an effort to abandon these. So here, it really is getting into how not just merely identifying those kinds of mental factors, but how they are faulty in the sense of causing various faults and what are the kinds of results that come from that. And so that's how this has been explained.
뭐야? 다 싸워르다. 그다 전주 선배 방사 권도 셰베 나중 앞에 배트 참마 전주 선배 저거 방고를 해서 동전 남게 라바리 하세 전주 선배 김바이나 때서 방고를 해서 네 동바 연계게 rab도 중앙 전주 선배도 텔레자 라바도 방고를 해서 그러와 나르셰베 니바트다 김배 전주 선배가 방바르차 자와다 전주 선배 rab도 중앙 동전 남게 라바도야 그때서 봐야 무슨 방고를 해서 그러와 야 뜻이구나
So then going back to the root text, and this is secondly sort of presenting a summary of the meaning, and this comes then in the first half of verse 434. A bodhisattva should forsake these faults. One with monastic precepts must forsake even more. So here, as was explained, these previously explained faults are explained both for those bodhisattvas who are householders as well as those who are ordained. And so these are things that are to be abandoned by householder bodhisattvas, and even more so with more sort of effort by those who are ordained.
Oh, yeah. 당아주 대 가르치도서나 그발래서 이봐 연대 랑발라 라바서도 단다타케 나중갑데 빵고를 시에사라 다 연대데데 랑고레서 연대 랑발라 이봐 연대 랑발라 니세 네갑지 연대데데 랑고레서 터도지 연대데 토발라 랑고레서 니세도 다 당보들 실탄 바다 내가 사주 남샤 시에도 연대지단 아니 사주 대바침보 남래야 쇼베네 사주 전에 산예고가 더불어 어디 남셔셔도 또 당불라 시에서 실단 받더라 연대경고 뒤뒤 땜바다 소소고 뭐서와다 소소 대부다 투무지 대부스다 섭제하시듯이 반전으로 다 당부들다 당부 가르치고 그러잖아 실단 봐 연대 그다 뒤뒤 땜바다 뒤뒤 땜바다 다 연대 뜻을 간가 뒤뒤 땜게 있어 당부들 다 예바 되남 당저와 연대 남라 달라테 단다께 다 이거야 나중 앞에 시사르와 예바 되남 당저와 연대 남라 달라테서 어때다 되게 연대 도줄야 야부스 땜고래 서다 자주 선배 예바 되남다 되나 연대 남라 telado tembar juruese kondo shebe kente so pana te doso je yende doso kaga tene telado toba yokude sora yeba pashi yende tembar chaos kyo tamazu pa te doso yende doso ne tenko rese
So then next, we turn to the second topic, which is adopting qualities, good qualities. And this is broken down into various subheadings, including first the sort of temporary qualities and then ultimate good qualities. And so first, these temporary good qualities are divided into a kind of general teaching, and then it gets into the good qualities of the 10 grounds, how one progresses through those 10 bodhisattva grounds. Now, first, the general teaching gives a brief description of the entities of good qualities and then identifying the individual entities of good qualities as well as their individual effects, the results that come from them, and then the general effects. So here, to begin with, we have then a brief teaching or description of the entities of good qualities, which comes then in the second half of verse 434, where it says, when one is freed of these faults, one can easily develop positive qualities. So these 57 faults are to be abandoned, and by abandoning those 57, one will be able to easily develop positive qualities. So here it's really an exhortation to make an effort at abandoning those faults, and if one is free of those faults, one will be able to easily sort of depend on or develop these good qualities.
Oh yeah, those are those tambo yende duty tembas yende duty tembas. That the chorus, never tenam tang trewa yende namla tala tense. Ane kare chanchu sembe never tenam tang trewa nas yende namla tala do juban juve never pass yende tembar chawa this one. Yache, that tell a chanchu semba ye yenden dorde chawane ta yenden dorde de shade karesana. Chinda chutum chundu something shirap yingji soasa. Yenden dorde ne tiresa. Chimbacha chutisha sabasa chundusha. Something shirap shara. Ane something shirap ne yingji chambu soasa stu. Tikar ya. What is dona? Devalo Mogoshan Tura, Tela Chanjus, Yunde Dorto to Tembachashi, the Kashina, Chimbachutu Savasante, La Sopata, Yinjita, and then Te Kunelambe, Simgiso, that Ninji Kunelane, to meditate Tagasha, teach to Sanja Kubato Wacha, Chanju Sembla Soba. What does it? Thank you, this Dorto Nayade, yeah.
So then, in this brief description of the entities of good qualities, it continues into verse 435, which says, in short, the good qualities that a bodhisattva should develop are generosity, ethical conduct, fortitude, joyous effort, meditative stability, wisdom, compassion, and so on. So here, these are in brief the kinds of good qualities that a bodhisattva should develop, and here listing them out: generosity, ethical conduct, fortitude, joyous effort, meditative stability, wisdom, and compassion, and so on. And these are then listed out in the commentary to this. And the one last thing to note is that when it says compassion, it refers to the kind of attitude of bodhicitta that is motivated by that compassion. So when we have this kind of compassion for sentient beings, observing their suffering and the thought, I will free them from their suffering, one then takes up this attitude of bodhicitta, which is included in these good qualities. So we've reached the end of our time for today, and Genla is making sure to make a big mark so we can remember where we are going to be picking up there and with identifying the individual entities of the good qualities.
Thank you, Genla. Tuchiche.
뭐야?
And Katrina, please thank Genla for the beautiful, inspiring motivation at the beginning. And we'll do our best to apply these to our daily lives. And so we'll finish up with some dedications.
May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice it have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Lobsang's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Iram Guru Ratnavali Kampiryatayami. Due to this merit may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.
Teringi ngodru sungchoche di mixe tukche na shuye yores.
뭐야? 도대체 welcome. 야, 뭐야?
Recording stop.